Hi everyone, I'm Gary Watson from Mainland Broadcasting in Nelson, New Zealand. If you have an issue or a subject you would like to see broadcast on Issues, then please drop us an email at issues@7-media.net and we'll see what we can do. If you have an issue that you believe is of interest to the wider community and would like to appear as a guest on the program, we'd love to hear from you.
It's strange to think that I can still remember the smell after all this time. The year was 1978, not long after my 15th birthday, and I'd sneaked into my brother's bedroom. There on a wall of shelves that stretched to the ceiling were the heaviest books we had in our house, 24 volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica. I carefully pulled out the volume mark and turned to the entry for Hodgkin's disease. It took forever to read the half-dozen paragraphs, but the last line I understood all too well. 75% of the people who got it would die within 5 years. As it turns out, I did not die from Hodgkin's, though the cancer had already spread from my neck to my lungs and spleen. I lost my spleen to surgery and most of my hair to chemotherapy and radiation, but I was lucky.
Clifton Leaf is a survivor. He'll never forget his standoff with cancer. Now a journalist for a major American magazine, he has abiding memories of the suffering and anguish he went through. Perhaps this is what gives him the right to ask awkward questions, to challenge generally accepted ideas. For although Clifton Leaf won his own personal war against the disease, how many more are struggling in uncertainty? How many will be forced to give up the fight?
1,500 Americans die of cancer every single day. As one researcher pointed out to me, that's the equivalent of one World Trade Center tower collapsing in a fiery ball every single day. Imagine that, a 9/11 every 2 days, all from cancer deaths. It's an unthinkable tragedy, and no one ever really thinks about it in that proportion.
Cancer has become the scourge of our industrialized societies. We wanted to know why. When we met him, Clifton Leaf had just spent several months traveling around the United States, doing research into how the war on cancer was progressing. Like us, he'd been influenced by the optimism of official declarations, and he wasn't expecting the results he uncovered.
When I first set out to do this story, I thought we were entering a new age of cancer breakthroughs, of molecularly targeted medicine. That's really what I wanted to look at. I thought that was a good business story for Fortune. I thought that was a good science story. And it was exciting to me that we were turning the corner in the war. It was only after looking at the numbers that I began to wonder that something else was going on. And after starting to talk to people and discovering that, in fact, we were not doing well at all in this war. And that changed everything.
The magazine's headline may seem shocking, yet if it really is a war, we need to know how it's being waged. We need to understand how business rivalries dictate the direction research takes, and how influential lobbies put a lid on unpalatable statistics. In order to understand, we must go back 30 years to a decisive moment in the story, a moment when politics and science seem to be heading towards a common goal. "1969. The Apollo program had achieved its aim and put a man on the moon. A giant leap for mankind, indeed, but an example, too, of the sin of pride. There was a growing feeling that nothing could now resist the power of the human brain. All that was needed was enough energy and sufficient funding. 2 years later, Nixon uttered a short and thereafter famous speech declaring war on cancer. It was a war which he imagined would be short and glorious, like the Apollo program.
I will also ask for an appropriation of an extra $100 million to launch an intensive campaign to find a cure for cancer, and I will ask later for whatever additional funds can effectively be used. The time has come in America when the same kind of concentrated effort that split the atom and took man to the moon should be turned toward conquering this dread disease.
At the time, America was bogged down in Vietnam. Nixon sorely needed a victory.
We were a country at war at that time. The war in Vietnam was still being waged, so there had been talk about that we could wage war and have domestic programs at the same time. It was a policy that was called guns and butter. And I think the war on cancer was an example of that. It was used, the terminology was wartime terminology, but it was saying we could solve a major health problem while we were still fighting a war.
This warlike vocabulary soon captured people's imagination. Cancer was henceforth the enemy. Drugs were the weapons used against it, selected from a therapeutic arsenal by the doctor generals who decided the strategy. Every war needs its propaganda.
With the hope that the same kind of concentrated effort that took man to the moon will one day conquer this disease, cancer.
Nixon had promised the discovery of a treatment within 5 years. The media shared this very political optimism.
No one who was involved in writing the bill thought that it would cure cancer in 5 years, and that's the kind of foolish information that's put forth by those in advertising and politics who try to persuade people that things are simple. Cancer is not simple.
War was declared, the enemy identified, but no one knew anything about this enemy. Cancer at the time was a black hole.
On savait que le cancer était des cellules qui devenaient folles, qui devenaient anarchistes, comme on disait alors, qui n'obéissaient plus aux lois des tissus, qui devenaient autonomes, indépendantes, qui s'infiltraient chez les autres, un petit peu comme des bandits qui allaient visiter les maisons voisines. Donc il y avait cette notion déjà très claire que c'était une maladie d'une cellule qui était devenue un petit peu folle. Mais on ne savait pas pourquoi, et on ne savait pas comment on pouvait changer les choses.
The aim of any treatment was to destroy these crazy cells, and the weapons were well known. The most ancient of these mentioned in Egyptian papyruses was surgery. It was also the most effective. Radiotherapy came into use early in the 20th century. Using a radioactive source, radium and then cobalt, the cancerous cells are bombarded with ionizing rays. But when the tumor is deep down, the rays burn the surface tissues without affecting the cancer. After the scalpel and burning, the third weapon is poison. The first tests carried out on patients with leukemia were done with mustard gas, used as a weapon in the First World War. Chemotherapy was born of these trials. Its aim is to kill the cancerous cells that have colonized various parts of the patient's body, the metastases.
Our weapons to deal with cancer were weapons of destruction. And these weapons were very powerful, but they also had very serious consequences and side effects. We knew that it was the disease that people feared the most. It was associated with death and suffering. It was very frightening. Many people didn't even talk about cancer.
In those years, the surgeon always came first. He felt responsible for the patient, for possible relapses, and therefore didn't want to leave a single cancerous cell around the site of the tumor.
In the 1970s, more and more extensive surgery was being done. Pelvic exonerations, which would remove the bladder and the rectum and the uterus in women who had advanced cervical cancer. Exonerations of the face that would remove large portions of the face for advanced cancers. But these operations were very rarely curative.
C'était le malade au bout du couloir qui hurlait nuit et jour. C'était ça le cancer. C'était des gens qui passaient en rasant les murs avec le regard bas parce qu'ils étaient amputés du sein, des muscles sous le sein. C'est des gens qui étaient brûlés, qui avaient du mal à respirer. Sans compter l'aspect social du cancer. Cette maladie, source de discrimination, d'exclusion, de ce regard si particulier des gens. Et ces malades souffraient sans espoir, sans rien. Ils n'avaient rien d'autre à attendre que la mort. Cette mort venait doucement et venait en faisant mal. Et moi, je me souviens, jeune interne, de ces malades-là. Alors, ils n'avaient pas, pour beaucoup de médecins, ils n'étaient pas les malades les plus intéressants du service, parce qu'il y avait d'autres pathologies qu'on pouvait traiter et guérir. Et c'est quand même ça qui intéresse les médecins, c'est traiter et guérir. Donc on avait la tuberculose avec les antituberculeux, les infections avec les antibiotiques, etc.
C'était des laissés pour compte. C'était des espèces de parias de la société. Et ça, nous ne voulions pas que ces malades soient des parias de la société. Et c'est pour cela qu'il y avait une énergie phénoménale et que nous avions le sentiment, en plus, que nous construisions l'avenir et que nous travaillions non pas, bien sûr, pour les malades immédiats, mais en plus, en créant cette nouvelle discipline médicale, que nous avions le sentiment que nous allions faire des progrès majeurs à la médecine.
The most dramatic cases were children. In 1945, all children with cancer would die. There were major difficulties to overcome, especially with leukemia, cancer of the blood. The surgeon was of no use here, and chemotherapy, with a small choice of products, only managed partial remissions. Dangerous last chance trials were conducted, like bone marrow transplants.
C'était des malades qui étaient condamnés à mort et qui étaient condamnés à mort à brève échéance. Donc on avait le droit, et on avait même le devoir de tout essayer pour les sauver. Mais c'était des situations épouvantables dans lesquelles on se trouvait, avec des enfants qu'on mettait dans un état épouvantable et qui souvent mouraient dans des conditions difficiles.
Ne t'inquiète pas, tu n'auras pas mal. Ferme le point fort.
This child is about to receive a bone marrow transplant provided by a donor in an adjoining operating theatre. To reduce the possibility of rejection, the child is first completely irradiated, stripped of all his immune defenses. This revolutionary treatment was developed at Villejuif Hospital in France in the 1960s. It paved the way for the compatible bone marrow transplants carried out today. The children at the time did not survive.
In children, it's hard to forget a child who dies and dies of a disease that you are incapable of helping.
In 1955, James Holland was a member of the team which achieved the world's first cure by chemotherapy of a cancer of the placenta. Here at the Roosevelt Institute in New York State, he devoted all his energy to treating children with leukemia. He innovated, experimented, came up with new protocols.
When you know that the child is going to die unless you do something, it makes it easier to do something. When you recognize the responsibility for the child's life rests in your hands, then you have to be good at giving the appropriate antibiotics, good at giving the appropriate support, and devising the treatments that are potentially valuable. Is there worry? Sure, but would a good oncologist be scared? No, a good oncologist would say, this is what I must do because it's the best possible alternative.
Hi, I'm John McMillan at the Nelson Power Tool Centre. We have great prices on all the top quality brands of power tool. Tools and equipment at our showroom, 146 Tahunanui Drive in Nelson. The Nelson Power Tool Centre, the specialists that stand behind and service what we sell.
Discover the Belgrove Tavern just 20 minutes south of Richmond on State Highway 6 for meals, functions, weddings, barbecues and garden bar with lots of room for kids. Come and see us.
FAV Mobile Solutions are the scooter, walker and wheelchair specialists for the Nelson region. Call in and see the huge range available. Take one for a free test drive and pick up your free booklet guide. They also provide a rescue service if you ever get a puncture or a flat battery. Come in and see Robin and the friendly team at FAV Mobile Solutions in the Richmond Free Car Park opposite the Old Town Hall.
Nestled in the garden city of Christchurch is one of New Zealand's most beautiful and famous holiday parks, where we join the wildlife with a warm welcome to all visitors. The canopy of trees and gardens provide a tranquil setting amongst all the amenities, playgrounds, swimming and spa pools, and entertainment on a grand scale. This wonderful park offers the weary traveller a haven of quality. Low-cost cabins, motels, tourist flats, caravan, campervan and campsites. Meadow Park, located on Cranford Street near the main North Road, Christchurch.
Oh, to be healthy.
Lifestyle, diet and exercise, complemented with quality supplements, can provide you the insurance vital for your natural health and well-being. With over 10 years professional experience making some of New Zealand's most trusted nutritional supplement brands, visit the Oh to be Healthy factory outlet in Wakatu Industrial Estate. Over 200 supplements to choose from, free on-site parking, no middleman.
Oh, to be healthy. Caring for you naturally.
Gradually, the remission times lengthen. People started talking of survival curves. Today, children's cancers are among those that respond best to treatment, with a cure rate of about 75%. In the 1970s, the progress achieved against leukemia, thanks to chemotherapy, became the example to follow.
On avait à peu près une vingtaine de médicaments à l'époque. Ces 20 médicaments, on essayait de voir s'ils marchaient sur tous les types de cancers. Et alors, on sélectionnait en fonction de l'expérience, de ces cas par cas, si vous voulez, pour savoir telle molécule va marcher mieux dans le cancer du sein, telle autre va marcher mieux dans les cancers digestifs, et ainsi de suite. C'est comme ça qu'on travaillait.
The challenge now was to go from cancer of the blood to other kinds of cancer. This required new products. Scientists explored nature in search of new poisons. They scoured the world's forests, investigated the know-how of witch doctors and healers, and dredged the depths of the oceans for a magic sponge with which to attack crazy cells. By 1975, the National Cancer Institute had already analysed 40,000 molecules taken from natural products. If a molecule exhibited an anti-carcinogenic effect on an animal, its toxicity was then studied. If the toxicity was judged to be acceptable, it was then tried on people. This led to therapeutic trials on a large scale. There was cooperation between countries, the United States, Europe, Canada. It became the business of statisticians. The aim was to gather the greatest number of patients to substantiate the validity of the experiments.
La seule méthode, c'était de dire, on a un traitement qui ne marche pas fort, mais enfin qui existe. On va essayer de voir si on ajoute tel agent ou si on fait ça, si ça marche mieux. Et d'ailleurs, la cancérologie, ça continue comme ça. On compare toujours, à l'aveugle, avec des tirages au sort, un protocole contre un autre. Alors, le tirage au sort, alors dans un pays comme la France, le tirage au sort, moralement, c'est inadmissible. Comment vous allez condamner? On a dit, oui, mais c'est la seule façon d'avancer. Il n'y a pas de moralité là-dedans.
Et qu'est-ce que vous disiez aux patients?
Mais à ce moment-là, c'était beaucoup plus... On leur disait rien, à vrai dire.
Quand il s'agissait d'évaluer un nouveau médicament, il fallait le tester contre un placebo. Et il y avait des quantités de groupes dans le monde qui acceptaient de faire ça pour pouvoir valider un concept. Mais ce disant, ils sacrifiaient à l'avance 50% des patients. Tous ces groupes recevaient par malade validé 100 ou 200 $ ou quelque chose comme ça. C'était pas pour se mettre dans leur poche, c'était pour le service, pour les appareils, les secrétaires, etc. Mais je n'aurais pas voulu être traité comme ça et je me refusais à traiter comme cela des patients qui se confiaient à moi en sachant qu'ils étaient dans une situation délicate.
Science feels its way forward by trial and error, often getting waylaid. It doesn't obey anyone's political agenda. 5 years after the war was declared, cancer still didn't have its promised treatment.
On était vraiment à la recherche de l'aiguille dans la meule de foin, comment trouver un fil conducteur qui allait permettre de comprendre ce qui se passait. Et c'est là où le miracle est venu, pas d'une direction où on l'attendait, mais d'une autre direction, de l'étude des virus. Et c'est vraiment l'étude des virus qui a brusquement éclairci tout le problème.
On pensait que, conformément aux modèles animaux, il y avait des virus qui portaient des gènes cancer, des gènes qui allaient créer le cancer, et que ces virus donc existaient également chez l'homme.
The Nixon plan had unblocked millions of dollars for studying the link between viruses and cancer. The hypothesis was that a virus carrying a cancer gene somehow got into the cell. It was this that brought about the disorder and made the cell cancerous. Dozens of laboratories around the world joined the race to identify this virus. The unexpected solution came from a young French scientist working in an American laboratory at Berkeley.
C'était si je me souviens bien, au cours d'un week-end dans la nuit, et j'étais tout seul dans le labo et puis le lundi matin, ça y est, j'avais déjà tous les tracés, toutes les quantifications, etc. Et c'est tombé comme une bombe. Et on se disait, voilà, tout ce que tout le monde cherche, et ça y est, je l'ai dans mon tube et j'ai un réactif qui arrive à le détecter. C'était assez extraordinaire.
What had Stellan discovered that was so revolutionary? He'd found that the gene carried by the virus, the gene that triggers the cancer, already exists in the nucleus of every human cell. This discovery, which won the two bosses of Stellan's lab but not Stellan himself the Nobel Prize 13 years later, completely changed people's conception of cancer.
With this discovery, with the work of Dominic Stellan in the Varmus Bishop Laboratory, came the realization that the true enemy comes from within our own genes, from within our body, and is not imported into the body from outside.
The theoretical framework was finally in place. Genes played the major role. To understand, it was necessary to penetrate the nucleus of the cell and unroll the filament of DNA. The genes are fixed along the entire length of the double helix. In man, there are from 20 to 30,000 in every nucleus. And they're like the books of a library, which contain all the information necessary for the cells to do their work. This information controls all of the cell's functions, its life and death. But DNA can be damaged. In this case, the genes are altered and the cell no longer behaves normally. If the gene responsible for the cell's growth mutates, it can cause the cell to multiply in an unpredictable way. This is how cancer starts.
On se disait tout de suite que ça allait être le support d'un éventuel médicament qui allait réguler ce gène ou contrôler ce gène et qui pouvait devenir un médicament universel du cancer. Je pense que beaucoup de gens pensaient ça.
The identification of this cancer gene, or oncogene, was in fact but the first piece of a huge jigsaw puzzle, the overall shape of which was still unknown. Putting this puzzle together became an obsession of the Doctor Generals and consumed the majority of research funding. But these long-term strategies did nothing for the patients, whose daily struggle was barely improved.
La science, ça prend du temps. On se dit, bon, ben, ça a fait un progrès, mais pas un progrès suffisant. Il faut voir comment on peut améliorer. Et puis, on a compris cette chose énorme, qu'on pouvait éviter l'apparition des cancers.
In this war, a second front was now established, using a different kind of weapon, that of prevention. Preventing the appearance of certain kinds of cancer had been possible for over 20 years. In a study published in 1954, Richard Doll, an English epidemiologist, had followed the work of 40,000 doctors for 3 years and had clearly shown the link between lung cancer and cigarette smoking. For a long time, this study had gone unheeded. The tobacco lobby fought back, relying on the cigarette's positive image as a symbol of independence and self-assurance. It was only when research into new treatments started to encounter problems that the no-smoking approach came to the forefront. Here was a way of redressing the appalling mortality figures. The most hard-hitting campaigns were in the United States and England.
You lose.
France did not escape this phenomenon. There were 2 billion cigarettes consumed per year in 1900. By 1975, this figure had risen to 90 billion. Oncology had found its battle horse. In France, a law was passed placing restrictions on tobacco use. Cancer experts became media stars.
On dit qu'il faut apprendre aux gens à fumer. Il faut qu'ils fument avec filtre, il faut qu'ils laissent de longs mégots, il faut qu'ils ne gardent pas la cigarette à la bouche, il faut qu'ils éteignent la cigarette. D'accord. Mais tout ça, c'est des petits palliatifs, c'est rien du tout par rapport au fait essentiel qu'est cette quantité de substances toxiques qu'une seule cigarette accumule dans le poumon. Une seule cigarette fait baigner le poumon pendant 15 minutes dans une atmosphère extrêmement toxique.
Maurice Tubiana, a renowned radiotherapist, was for 20 years the cancer expert on television. As official spokesman for the medical world, he brushed aside certain factors related to pollution to concentrate cancer prevention efforts on the no-smoking battle, and later, on early detection.
Vous avez le droit, en fumant, de sacrifier 5 ou 10 ans de votre vie, mais est-ce que vous avez le droit de supprimer 5 ou 10 ans de la vie de vos enfants? D'abord, on a été traîné dans la boue comme ayatollah intolérant, et des médecins quelquefois connus, pas toujours de façon désintéressée, sont allés dire mais le tabac n'est pas dangereux, on exagère beaucoup, ça n'est pas du tout un vrai problème.
Anything can be considered harmful. Applesauce is harmful if you get too much of it.
I don't think many people are dying from applesauce.
They're not eating that much.
People are smoking a lot of cigarettes.
Well, let me say it this way. The people who eat applesauce die. The people who eat sugar die. The people who smoke cigarettes die. Does the fact that the people who smoke cigarettes die demonstrate that smoking is the cause?
This doctor's edifying testimony is taken from a documentary which was shown on British television and then banned as a result of pressure from the Philip Morris Company. Parodying Marlboro commercials, the documentary painted a harrowing portrait of cowboys afflicted with lung cancer. Philip Morris's defense was a simple one, a combination of doctors acting under orders, lies and cynicism.
You must remember that it was not too long ago in this country that they said cigarettes caused tuberculosis. Well, the tragedy of science was that they literally quit looking for the real cause of TB. You know, 7 states in the United States outlawed the sale of cigarettes as recently as the 1920s because they were sure they caused tuberculosis. Of course, later they found they had nothing to do with tuberculosis. How many people died as a result of that? That's what I think is very serious indeed.
The response of the tobacco industry prefigured the strategies adopted by all industries later implicated in cancer cases. The first step is to minimize the gravity, then to cite scientific uncertainty while casting doubt on the validity of the research. The asbestos industry was no exception. For a long while, asbestos, along with the whole category of occupational cancer, would be ignored by those preaching prevention. Workers were dying of mesothelioma, a sort of lung cancer caused by asbestos dust, to widespread indifference. At companies like Johns Manville in the United States, striking workers were fighting for their cases of cancer to be acknowledged as occupational. They protested against the silence of the company doctors.
For 20 years, 30 years, some of us have been very fortunate to make that.
Here too in Canada, the world's biggest exporter of asbestos, workers were becoming aware of the risks they were running and were starting to demand protection. What were the doctors doing?
Hi, Gus Bulens of Gustav's Clothing for Men on Trafalgar Street. I'd like to invite all the people of Nelson, Tasman and international and local visitors to come and check out our brand new refurbished store, which is now chock full of the latest international and New Zealand brands. From France, Lacoste; from the UK, Ben Sherman; R.M. Williams; from Sweden, Gant; from the US, Calvin Klein jeans; and from New Zealand, Rembrandt suits, jackets and trousers; Cutler, Berlin and snowy fine merino knitwear. So come on into Gustav's on Trafalgar Street and we'll look after you.
Why would you want to pay as much as $1,000 for a single bed mattress when you can buy a high quality locally made mattress like this for as little as $220? And a queen size mattress could cost you in excess of $3,000, but at Nelson Beds you could have a mattress like this as low as $425. So why would you go out and spend a fortune on your child's bedroom when you can come to Nelson Beds and buy a complete single mattress and base set, a 7-drawer Scotch chest, a headboard and a 3-drawer bedside cabinet for as little as $979? So call and discuss our custom manufacturing options and local after-sales service at Nelson Beds, Nelson's only bedding manufacturer.
Discover the Belgrove Tavern just 20 minutes south of Richmond on State Highway 6 for meals, functions, weddings, barbecues and garden bar with lots of room for kids. Come and see us.
Nelson Tire Center. Great prices, great service. Buy your own Bryford trailer. All types, all sizes. See Colin Douglas for your tires and batteries.
Je ne vois pas ce que nous, cancérologues, pouvions aller faire. Il aurait fallu aller dans les chantiers navals et dire aux gens voilà la façon dont il faut manipuler.
C'est qu'en réalité, l'amiante, c'était quelque chose d'indispensable à une époque à l'industrie et que les lobbying, et on s'est bouché les oreilles et puis c'est tout.
This is Dr. Samuel Epstein. He believes that the connection between the environment and the epidemic of cancer in our society is inescapable.
It was in the United States that environmental problems were first added to the debate. In a groundbreaking book, Samuel Epstein was the first to make a virulent criticism of cancer policies.
The problem isn't lack of information, the problem isn't lack of laws, but the problem is a massive failure to implement existing knowledge and existing information. And the reasons for this are frankly political and economic and not scientific.
From 1970s to 1980s, the public was so impressed by the major efforts and the money that was going into the National Cancer Institute that it hadn't dawned on the public, and it hadn't dawned on many scientists, that there was this indifference to prevention. But as cancer rates increased, cancer rates particularly of non-smoking related cancers, as they started increasing, questions began to be asked.
Chlordane kills termites. The problem is that it might, just might, kill humans too.
If a foreign power sent these spray planes over California...
The media latched onto the subject. Investigations were launched, herbicides and pesticides stood in the dock. A scandal drew cameras to the north of New York State, where during the 1950s, an electrochemical giant had buried its waste in a channel known as Love Canal. The land was filled in and sold for $1, and a school and homes were later built on the spot. In 1977, anomalies started to be noticed. Children at the school were getting cancer. There was an increased number of congenital malformations. Women living there were miscarrying. 82 different chemical products were found in the earth. An inquiry was launched and a Senate committee was set up, chaired by Edward Kennedy. Love Canal became the symbol of those years.
I can't believe that people in power are doing nothing, and we are still there. I'm sick of being a guinea pig. I want out. Test me later, but my God, get me out now and my kids. And we live and breathe this every day. I just want someone to do something and help us so we can end this tragedy and learn how to clean it up and set the precedents, because Love Canal is not last, it's first of many.
Numerous research projects were ready to be launched. The environmentalists were on a roll. But a political upheaval was about to change things.
You ain't seen nothing yet.
Ronald Reagan was on campaign. Strictly adhering to a new economic liberalism, he was quick to attack anything that might impede free enterprise. He had the Environmental Protection Agency firmly in his sights.
I have spoken consistently against overregulation. Now, you in the steel and the coal industry knows what it's like to deal with the EPA administrators who neither care about nor understand your industries. Those are the people that if they had their way, you and I would have to live in rabbit holes or birds' nests.
Once elected, Reagan kept a few of his promises. He slashed the EPA's budget by 60%, cut off numerous researchers' funding, and drew up a blacklist of scientists to be eliminated from the public circuit.
I was at the top of the list, together with a friend of mine called Matthew Meselson from Harvard, who had been involved with me in forcing the administration to stop the use of Agent Orange in Vietnam. And against my name, and Meselson's name, was perfectly horrible, keep out at all costs. And after that, my funding was cut off. I was being funded before for research by the National Cancer Institute and also by the National Institute for Environmental Health Sciences. My funding was cut off entirely, so I was no longer able to do any original scientific research.
The Reagan years hallowed economic deregulation, placing the individual at the center of the system. It was in this context that Richard Doll and Richard Peto published a study on the causes of cancer. According to their findings, tobacco was responsible for 30% of cancers, alcohol for 12%, food for 35%, and viruses for 15%. Pollution and exposure in the workplace were reduced to only 6% of cases. The emphasis was firmly on individual responsibility. At the same time, the development of new technologies pushed pharmaceutical laboratories onto the battlefield, whereas they'd hitherto shown little interest in cancer. They flooded the field with their publicity, and this time, the angle of attack had changed. Now it was the entire body that was being called on to defend itself against cancer.
L'immunothérapie, qui était la vieille idée que l'organisme peut se défendre contre le cancer, la preuve c'est que la plupart des gens n'ont quand même pas le cancer, donc ils se défendent quand même. qu'on trouverait un jour les mécanismes pour ça, c'est-à-dire l'immunothérapie, c'était une idée séduisante. Et on se disait, on va enfin échapper à la chimiothérapie bête et méchante.
Fortifying the immune system is all very well, but what with? Interferon was the first candidate for the title of wonder drug. Interferon is a hormone which already exists in the human body, protecting it against viruses. The idea was to manufacture interferon and inject large doses into patients in an attempt to boost their immune systems to fight cancer. But the process required human blood, which was difficult to obtain in large enough quantities. This is where the laboratories came in.
Puisque nous parlons santé, cette découverte qui va peut-être beaucoup aider les progrès de la science, peut-être aussi importante que celle des antibiotiques, la synthèse artificielle de l'interféron. C'est une équipe internationale de chercheurs qui travaille à l'université de Zurich.
The discovery of synthetic interferon was as important as that of antibiotics, we were told. There was an enormous amount at stake regarding potential treatments, but economically too. The race was on to produce the largest quantities of pure interferon. This is the paste from which it was to be produced, manufactured by genetically manipulated bacteria. Next came the race to carry out drug trials. The surprise came from the University of Texas in January 1981. Jordan Gutterman, a renowned cancer expert, announced that interferon tests would be carried out on 16 volunteer cancer patients.
7 of those 16 patients in the initial study with pure synthetic interferon achieved regression of far advanced cancer.
The speed took people by surprise, as did the means of communication, a press conference. Gutterman was under contract to 2 laboratories, Hoffman and Genentech, who supplied him with the very costly product. Questions of ethics were pushed aside. The winner would be whoever got there first, whoever pulled off the miracle. Even the patients were invited to the media circus.
Oh, I feel it's a miracle drug, and I hope it's available to the whole world eventually.
This was the star system at play, but in this case, cancer itself was the star. And the disappointment was on a par with the initial excitement. In fact, interferon has extremely toxic side effects, and it's only effective in 2 types of cancer. A far cry from the hoped-for miracle, and after millions had been invested. Interferon showed what the future would be like in the 1980s. Innovation, business, and media coverage. In any war, there are attempts to pierce the enemy lines with daring forays, sudden, unexpected maneuvers to force fate's hand. Steven Rosenberg had the mindset of a revolutionary general. Not afraid of launching bold offensives, he was intuitive, quick, and media-friendly. This brilliant surgeon from the National Cancer Institute was best known for having operated on President Reagan's cancer in the summer of 1985.
Hello. Good afternoon. Hello. Hi. Please stay where you are. Please sit down. Good. How you doing? Good. Good to see you.
Things are going well. Can't be going better.
Great.
Great. We have a good treatment. As you know, we've seen some very dramatic
I'm really feeling pretty good, Doc. I really am.
Good.
Got a great team here.
Good. I often quote and have on the wall of my office a quote from John Hunter, who's a brilliant 17th century surgeon, who said that surgery is like an armed savage who attempts to get by force what civilized men would get by strategy. And I wanted to develop new strategies, not bigger operations which couldn't cure cancer, but develop strategies that might seek out and destroy cancer wherever it had spread through the body.
With high-tech means, Rosenberg pushed the logic of immunotherapy to its limit. White blood cells into killers of cancerous cells. In the laboratory, he combined interleukin-2, a hormone of the immune system, with the patient's white blood cells, and then injected the mixture back into the patient's body. It was a revolutionary and sophisticated treatment.
We had treated 66 consecutive patients with advanced cancer using our immunotherapy approaches, trying to figure out ways to use interleukin-2 and cell transfers to treat patients. And it worked in none of those patients. All went on to die of their cancer. And it was our treatment of the 67th patient, and I'll never forget the moment. I was sitting in my office, and one of our residents knocked on the door and had an x-ray in his hands, and he held it up, and he said, "Dr. Rosenberg, I have an x-ray here I think you'll be interested in." And he threw it up on the view box, and sure enough, there was a patient that had cancers in the lung who had received interleukin-2, and the cancers were gone. And that was an incredibly dramatic moment.
From CBS News, Washington, Face the Nation.
Research doctors have developed a new high-tech weapon in their war on cancer. Dr. Steven Rosenberg has seen measurable success in 11 of his 25 patients, with everything from melanoma to lung to colon cancer.
This represents, I think, the best hope we have for another weapon in this war against cancer.
The majority of information in our life comes to us through our vision. With only one set of eyes to last our lifetime, it's important that you look after them. For over 20 years, Carrington Eye Care has led the way in providing the Nelson Tasman region with professional eye care. Our team are committed to providing you and your family with the highest standard of eye care. As part of this commitment at Carrington Eye Care, we recommend Crizal lenses. Crizal is a revolutionary lens which repels dust and fingerprints. This means it's easier to clean and stays cleaner longer. Visit us at our Nelson, Richmond practices and ask about our Crizal satisfaction guarantee.
Hi everyone, I'm Gary Watson from Mainland Television in Nelson. I'd like to invite you to join our news team for a roundup of news from the Nelson Tasman region on Sky Channel 83 at 4:30 p.m. on Saturdays and 9:30 p.m. on Sundays. We'll show you what's happening in the Nelson Tasman region, the latest local weather, community notices and events happening in our region. Our weekly news roundup is broadcast throughout the Nelson region on UHF Digital TV with the support from New Zealand On Air and repeated on Sky Channel 83 in conjunction with our good friends at Face TV.
Waimea Telecommunications, specializing in free-to-air digital television, internet broadband connections, telephone and telecommunications systems. Call Julian Toon at Waimea Telecommunications on 544-4203.
Arrêtons-nous quelques instants sur une information qui prouve que chaque jour, la communauté scientifique marque des points contre le cancer. Une révélation faite aujourd'hui par le professeur Steven Rosenberg. Monsieur Rosenberg est l'une des grandes sommités mondiales.
Tous les milieux scientifiques sont d'accord pour dire que c'est le plus grand pas accompli depuis longtemps dans la lutte contre le cancer.
The images of these two patients went around the world and triggered disproportionate expectations.
We were getting between 500 and 1,000 phone calls every day of patients who were in desperate situations that were seeking treatment. And I think all that early publicity raised unrealistic expectations. I mean, it was just a beginning. It was a treatment in the infancy of its development.
The media coverage was premature. Desperate cancer sufferers were ready to pay up to $30,000 to private companies for the interleukin treatment, which was very difficult to administer. The side effects were disastrous. Some patients were rushed to intensive care. In fact, Rosenberg's promising early results were never reproduced. Around the world, research continued with all its mistakes and false moves.
Les chercheurs japonais viennent de nous apporter un nouvel espoir dans le traitement du cancer.
Donner un espoir à tous ceux qui souffrent du cancer du rein. Ce mal était considéré jusqu'à présent comme intraitable. Il ne le serait plus.
En médecine, on peut mettre au point des micromissiles biologiques.
Tout aussi important, un nouveau traitement anticancéreux vient d'être expérimenté aux États-Unis pour la.
When the National Cancer Institute or American Cancer Society would come out with a statement, we've turned the war on cancer, the media would accept it. Who were the newspapers to criticize? How would they know the science? The authorities told them they were making great progress, not only in the war against cancer, we're discovering magic cures for cancer. So the media rolled over.
Ironically, and despite such optimistic press releases, real progress would come from an ancient weapon, surgery. Even as late as the 1980s, breast cancer surgery was still a radical affair. Surgery was already necessary to ascertain whether the tumor was malignant or not. If it was, the surgeon would remove the whole breast, the pectoral muscles, and the lymphatic canals. Before going into theatre, patients had to sign a consent form, authorizing the doctor to carry out this mutilation if he deemed it necessary.
I woke up from the surgery while still on the operating table. I remember that it was a very large bandage, and I was conscious enough to know that it was covering my whole chest area, not just a little Band-Aid that might have been covering where a lump was removed. And I said to him, "You had to do the radical, didn't you?" And he said to me, "Yes, we did."
Il faut quand même que vous compreniez qu'avant 1985, c'est pas il y a 200 ans, hein, il y a très peu de temps, il y a 20 ans, avant 1985, que vous ayez, par exemple, prenez le cancer du sein, qu'une femme se découvre porteur d'une tumeur d'1 centimètre, petit comme ça, ou d'une énorme tumeur de 14 ou 15 centimètres, la sanction était la même, on enlevait le sein. À partir de là, pourquoi voulez-vous que des femmes aillent faire du dépistage? Puisque de toute façon, là, si on trouve un cancer, c'est pareil, on les mutile, on enlève un sein.
In fact, 2 studies, one American, the other Italian, would show that this sort of drastic surgery isn't always more effective than the removal of just the tumor while preserving the breast. In these cases, women have just as much chance of survival provided that surgery is accompanied by radiotherapy or chemotherapy. This discovery removed the remaining obstacles to early testing and heralded the advent of medical teamwork.
En travaillant à plusieurs, c'est-à-dire c'est plus un malade chez qui on fait un diagnostic, qui est envoyé un chirurgien, qui l'opère, le malade s'en va, et puis c'était fini quand même. C'était ça le truc avant. Et ça, cette filière, elle a disparu. À partir de là, on va travailler à plusieurs pour vaincre le cancer. Et c'est comme si dans une guerre, finalement, vous avez l'idée d'associer la marine, l'aviation et l'infanterie pour aller combattre un ennemi et non pas juste laisser une de vos armées se battre toute seule.
For those seeking a decisive breakthrough, the next battle would be fought deep in the cell itself. The plan was to use previously untried arms to attack the untouchable, the secret heart of our biological identity. Who would dare meddle with our genes? Teams were gearing up, but this wasn't the 1970s anymore. Authorization was now required. Back into center stage stepped Stephen Rosenberg, keen to be the first to use these new techniques and step boldly into the unknown. Ten patients were selected, volunteers who had only months to live.
Once we were developing immunotherapy, we were exploring a lot of different methods to try to improve the immunotherapy. And one of the most exciting is an attempt to genetically modify the immune cells in the body, the lymphocytes, to improve their ability to fight the cancer. And for the first time, we had the tools to introduce foreign genes into cells and create cells with properties that never existed before in the course of evolution. But because it had never been done before, there were hearings and there were demonstrations to prevent us from doing this trial.
Obviously, there are benefits to this technology, but there are also tremendous social and environmental and ethical risks.
An American dies of cancer every minute. Last year in the United States, 485,000 Americans died of cancer. We're working around the clock desperately to try to find better ways to treat this disease.
With the ethical, social, and eugenics. And it took over 2 years to get approval before we finally began the first attempts to genetically modify people, do gene therapy for cancer treatment. And that started the whole field of gene therapy.
Genetic therapy is a mechanical operation. The idea is to replace a defective piece, the mutated gene at the origin of the cancer, with a new piece, a correctly functioning gene. Millions of viruses are then injected into the patient. These transport the repair genes to the cell's nucleus.
And on the evening news, when they announced that for the first time scientists at the NIH had introduced foreign genes into patients, they showed a picture of Frankenstein from the movie, and Frankenstein lumbering through the countryside with people with torches trying to kill him. There was great misunderstanding.
But the cancerous cell harbors too many unsteady genes. Despite all the attempts made over many years, genetic therapy still hasn't proved its worth. The war has thus become an ongoing series of announced and deferred victories. The weapons are becoming increasingly technical and costly. The investments increasingly inflated. Yet the therapeutic results fall far short of the expectations of the patients and their families.
Hope and optimism have masked the problem of the fact that we're not getting anywhere and something is broken in the way we do research and treat patients. And so we need hope and we need optimism. We need to be focused on the good in the world, and because otherwise everyone would lose heart and we wouldn't want to tackle this difficult problem. But you can't let that blind you to the fact that things are broken, and they're severely broken.
In the 1990s, patients started forming groups, wanting to be part of the decision-making process. Whether demanding extra funding or new ways of continuing the fight, patients became key players in the war. Cancer took to the streets, becoming a problem of society.
Well, that's Issues for another week. I hope you can join us at the same time next week when we'll cover another subject on the Issues program. In the meantime, if you have an issue or a subject you would like to see broadcast on the program, then please drop us an email at issues@7-media.net.
Hi, my name's Ian Mortimer. Mortimer Auto Upholstery is your one-stop shop for all your upholstery needs. We do car and boat interiors, boat canopies, ute tonneau covers, canvas and PVC fabrication. Call in and see us in Oxford Mews, 72 Oxford Street, Richmond.
FAV Mobile Solutions are the scooter, walker and wheelchair specialists for the Nelson region. Call in and see the huge range available. Take one for a free test drive and pick up your free booklet guide. They also provide a rescue service if you ever get a puncture or a flat battery. Come in and see Robin and the friendly team at FAV Mobile Solutions in the Richmond Free Car Park opposite the Old Town Hall.